Hey everyone, Dr. Joel Miller here. Welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. Here with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Tim Augustyniak. We're going to talk a little bit more here about some of the most common kids health issues and pediatric issues that we see in practice. We're going to finish wrapping up a little bit of really kind of last episodes where we're talking about just overall raising healthy kids and helping your kids to become as healthy as possible, and some things that you can do there. And I'm excited to get into this one. Dr. Tim, how are you doing this morning? I'm excited to get into this with you.
I'm doing great. Past couple weeks, I've seen quite a few kids in the office, so this is something that I have conversations about pretty often with parents. So
Good
it's
deal.
good stuff. So everybody, listen up, and we got really good things for you today.
Yep. So it's fresh. It's fresh. That's good.
It's always fresh.
Um, yes, for sure. So last episode was episode 16. Through that episode, we primarily talked about kind of the health of the mom going into pregnancy. We talked about pregnancy itself and birth, as really those are the foundational things for creating and helping your children to be as healthy as possible. You know, the sooner that you can start addressing those things, of course, it's going to only benefit your child as they're coming into this world. We talked a little bit about vaccines as well. And, Dr. Tim, I'm just realizing we didn't quite get into nutrition, I think, like we wanted to. And so we have that piece, which we'll talk about here. We'll cover some of the other kind of basic things that we love to share with our patients for helping kids be as healthy as possible, helping them to regulate their immune system, regulate their nervous system, and all of those good things. So let's kind of go through those, Dr. Tim, and then we'll jump into the most common health issues that we see with kids, and really kind of what causes them, and for the parents listening, what they can do to help their kids be as healthy as possible, to get over their allergies, to heal their immune system, to address the ADD, ADHD things that we see plaguing our kids so often. If kids get strep throat, chronic ear infections, enlarged tonsils, eczema, constipation, bedwetting, and sympathetic dominance. We're going to go through all those different things. So, but Dr. Tim, let's start with nutrition, shall we, for kids? So obviously, Dr. Tim, we've spent a lot of time talking through nutrition. And I would argue that the things that we talk about for adults and people in general, it really shouldn't change that much for kids. Still focusing on whole foods, avoiding processed foods, and things like that. But Dr. Tim, is there anything specific that you really like to emphasize when you're talking with parents about what they can do for their kids and their nutrition? Are there any certain foods that you see maybe causing more issues, or any certain foods that you really encourage parents to focus on there?
Yeah. So with food with kids, one of the biggest battles is going to be getting kids to eat the right things, which we'll get into in a second. But as far as it goes for foods that kids have issues with, let's reflect on, the most common allergies that we see, where gluten, dairy, nightshades, all those things are high on the list of driving issues. Well, nowadays, people are starting to have more and more inherent allergies to foods where they just need to eliminate them. We talk about food sensitivities versus allergies. Food sensitivities, when you're in Th2 dominance, you're going to become more sensitive to a lot of things, more sensitive to stress, to allergies, to mold, metals, gut issues. All that stuff is going to become more prominent. Well, that may or may not be the case with a full-blown food allergy. And so if a kid has a significant reaction to something like dairy or gluten, it may just be worth it just to totally eliminate that. So those two things are two of the most prominent that at least I know of and that I see.
Right.
So as far as it goes for things to totally eliminate, I wouldn't say if your kid doesn't have an issue, don't eliminate those. Or I'm sorry, if your kid doesn't have an issue, yes, do not eliminate those, because there are health benefits, to eating those. And from an early life standpoint, if there is no issue, I don't see it as necessary to eliminate stuff for no reason. A diverse diet is very important.
Yeah.
Um, so With food specifically, back to what I said about getting kids to eat good things. So I think that's most of the battle with kids is, okay, my kid just wants to eat like mac and cheese or chicken tenders or like, processed things that taste really good, that are simple and quick for you to make. But, it's a game of training them from a young age to, think of fruit as like a sweet snack, or give them diverse vegetables to, build up their microbiome and give them the good, fiber and starches and micronutrients that they need. Um, a good buddy of mine, I'll give him a shout out here, Dr. Howard Bobo, who he practices in Highland, Arkansas. he he told me this was a few years ago now, but him and his wife, they'll make like green lasagna or green spaghetti or things like that, where they call it like Hulk lasagna or something like that, where it's like the Incredible Hulk. And the way that they do that is they just blend up spinach and incorporate it in whatever sauce that they're making. And so the kids have no idea that it's in there. They can't even really taste it. They think it's fun.
Right.
Uh, and so little tricks like that to kind of mask things in there. He originally told me about that, and then I've seen all kinds of stuff about it online where a lot of holistic practitioners and the crunchy moms are doing that, just to get all those things in the kids' diet from an early age. That you're just kind of tricking them a little bit, and it's deceptive, but it's for their own health, um, and it's fun at that point. So whatever you got to do, some kids are really into eating and trying new things. I know for a fact that when I was a kid, I wasn't. So, I probably could have benefited from some, Hulk lasagna. So,
Yeah.
there's an idea. So that's those are the big things that I would stress with kids and eating. One other thing. So you kind of talked about how our recommendations for adults kind of carry over into with kids. And that is very, very true. Kids should be eating 3 meals a day, plenty of protein and fat for development, not too many carbs. We don't want to start the life off with blood sugar issues leading to
Mm.
insulin or stress hormone issues. But with that, I think it's important to address that kids during development, kids are like the Energizer Bunny. They have all this energy. They could run forever and play and do all these things. With that, kids inherently do have proportionately a higher carb need than adults. So you don't want to give your kid more carbs than you're eating, but at the same time, the proportions of protein to fat to carbs can be a little more skewed to the carbs, just because kids have a whole lot more energy that they need for burning and playing and running around and all those things. So if you notice that your kid's not getting hangry or not getting tired after they eat, all those things, you can push that carb limit a little bit, as long as it's your whole grain carbs, fruits, veggies, and then maybe some wild grain rice, quinoa, sweet potatoes. All those things are great for kids. So same type of guideline with adults, same indicators, but at the same time, they can require more carbs than adults. So just something to be aware of. And then, we wanted to get into things like, processed sugars, food dyes, seed oils, all that stuff. But I feel like I've rambled enough about this, so I'll kind of hand that back to you, Dr.
Yeah,
Hill.
no, you're good. That's the more that you kind of walk through that, the more that I'm reminded by just the amount of conversations I've had with parents where the biggest challenge is, well, my kids don't want to eat these things. And obviously that's extremely common. And so, yeah, there's different things like that where you can mix in certain foods and kids aren't super aware and that kind of thing. And those are definitely great ideas. And I would also say that, the thing that keeps coming to mind is kids and their health and really just overall, like their overall pickiness, their overall behavior, their overall activity. A lot of it revolves around their autonomic nervous system. And we were going to get into this a little bit later, but I think now is just a beautiful time to get into this, where we have the sympathetic nervous system, where, as adults, that's where we are stressed. That's where we're, surviving and that kind of thing. For kids, they have the same components of their nervous system, but for them, it looks more like they are super picky, they're super agitated, they don't sit still. That's where the ADD, ADHD stuff kind of comes in. Their nervous system is not regulated. And so understanding as a parent how you can help regulate your child's nervous system, I think, is huge. And so for the next couple pieces here, I think it would be super helpful to kind of point it back to that, like helping to regulate children's nervous systems. So I think, one of the things I've seen, like you mentioned, is these food sensitivities. So if kids are reacting to processed dairy, if they're reacting to gluten, and then obviously sugar is a big one, sometimes nightshades. I would say those are the biggest food sensitivities. There's other common ones like corn and every once in a while chocolate, but that's not as common for kids. And then I think that's eggs, I think, is probably the only common one that I would say. And so if you ever notice, that your kid in general is more ADD, ADHD, they can't sit still. Maybe they're just a little bit more irritable. Maybe they just don't seem like calm and balanced, which that's a lot of kids these days. As a parent, you might consider looking at some of these foods and taking a break from gluten for a couple of weeks and kind of seeing if your kid starts to kind of be a little bit more calm and more balanced. Same thing with the dairy. But one thing I will encourage, and I do this with all my patients generally, is it's usually the pasteurized dairy that's going to cause the problems. Raw dairy, like kids do great with. So you want to find a really good source of that. So again, all of these different things, point back to the nervous system and helping to regulate the nervous system. So we talked about seed oils and inflammatory seed oils. That's the vegetable oil, canola oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, peanut oil, and so on. You want to avoid those. You want to avoid those for your kids. Remember, those are going to be found in processed foods, a lot of processed foods. It's going to be found in most restaurant foods as they're cooking with those things and things like that. Now, Dr. Tim, when we talk about nutrition, I think we have to talk about like school lunches, right? I'm always encouraging parents to pack their kids' lunch. And obviously that's a little bit more work for the parents. But it's that, or it's you're left to whatever the school system has to offer, which is quite bad. Generally, it's just very, very processed. A lot of times when kids come in, it's like, hey, let's talk about nutrition. Okay, what is your child eating and everything? It's like school lunch. Okay, what's school lunch? Well, Tuesday is nachos and Friday is pizza. And it's like, hold on a second. We're feeding our kids this literally one meal every single day of the week. It's going to add up over a series of weeks and especially months. So just a really bad idea. We've talked about food dyes a little bit before. Dr. Tim, I just wanted to touch on that one though. Food dyes, essentially are going to increase this imbalance with the nervous system, going to increase the sympathetic response in kids, and potentially mess with the gut health as well. So Dr. Tim, I think a lot of these things just point back to this whole imbalance, right, between the sympathetic nervous system and just kind of wiring these kids up. Is there anything else that you would say as far as the food goes there that either are something that parents should watch out for or something that you think can help kids to regulate their nervous systems better as far as food goes? And then, of course, we also have these other factors too, these lifestyle factors that we can get into.
Yeah. So processed sugars, I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Eliminate all your candy and your, all the stuff within reason. Life's still life. So kids are going to want that stuff. And here and there with kids, of course, let them live life a little bit. Totally on board with that, but try to do your best to make sure it's not an everyday thing or even an every week thing. But with food dyes specifically, I think it's really important to mention, at least through all of my continued education and all the stuff along the way, one thing that, every single, training avenue that I've done, food dyes are always a big topic of conversation as it relates to things like ADHD, ADD, dyslexia, or even like autistic type tendencies where, I've heard plenty of stories where, other docs, they'll have kids eliminate just the food dyes and they go from having essentially like developmental learning delays to being right with it. And that's the one thing that was holding them back. Now,
Well,
have I seen that be a primary issue within how we practice with applied kinesiology and systems healthcare? No, I haven't seen that, but that's not to discredit that, with some people that might be the missing link to
mhm,
what the issue is. And I believe that there's plenty of docs that we know and look up to that they have found that. Just because I haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think that's very important. That it's not just, hey, this might drive some stress. They are correlated to some pretty significant developmental delays and learning issues at that point. So it's an easy enough thing to eliminate. So just read labels. Yellow
right,
number 5, I think, is a huge one that has really great research to show that it's really not good for you.
yeah,
And there's a few other ones that, like red 40, I know is a big one. And of
mhm,
course, there's a million different, colors and numbers. And
right,
those ones specifically, I've read research on as not being great. But if one's not good, I'd be willing to bet that, the artificial dyes with other colors and numbers are probably not great.
yeah,
So that's just my take on that. Now, with
right,
seed oils, I think it's important to note that they're exceptionally inflammatory, and that's the one of the biggest reasons that we want to keep them out of the diet. They're processed with all kinds of nasty chemicals. All they do is push inflammation as opposed to being anti-inflammatory, like good organic grass-fed butter and animal fats and your fish oils and all those things. Those are inherently anti-inflammatory.
mhm,
And so where once in the time frame of human civilization, we were nothing but anti-inflammatory when it comes to fats, we have moved into a day and age where fats are almost exclusively inflammatory,
right,
with people that eat a lot of heavily processed things with lots of seed oils. So, um, if these are all things where if you really want to stack the odds in your kid's favor in a world that the odds are stacked against them health wise, get rid of them and do the best you can. But at the same time, you might not notice, hey, my kid Joe didn't feel great after seed oils. That's probably not how it's going to be. But
right,
over time, it leads to that that load, inflammatory load on the system that will contribute to long-term issues. And I mean, I'd like to hear your take on this, Dr. Joel, but I'm a very strong believer that chronic inflammation from all different sources is one of the leading drivers of almost every single disease that we know of. Tissue breakdown leads to malfunctions in cell replication, and the immune system has to react to things. Your body has to build things up properly, and that's where issues arise. So, just great things that you can do to stack the odds in your kid's favor for sure.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Inflammation is huge, and that is like sprinkled in just about everything that we're kind of talking about. And I'm sure the listeners has seen that, but understanding that inflammation is a big piece is really important. So, yeah, obviously that inflammation, then we have to talk about then where it's coming from, which is the food, the chemicals we're exposed to, and by chemicals, right? That could be obviously um, through the food, right, from pesticides, GMOs, things like that. It can also be in vaccines, which we talked a bit about last episode, and just the adjuvants and the toxic things there. It can be found in a lot of different places. The quality of our air, the quality of our water, and all of those things. So inflammation is huge. Now, to the parents here, some other things that can help your child regulate their nervous system better. Being outside is huge. So being outside, there's a few factors there. One is, I would say, being in the sun is super important in regulating to the nervous system. Two is, if you can be barefoot and in contact with the grass, is huge and extremely important. And I'd say number three, there's a visual aspect where when we're inside, essentially when we look around, like there's sharp lines everywhere we look, between the wall, the picture frames, the ceiling, all these different things. When we're outside in nature, there's not as many straight lines. A lot of it is just very there's a lot of different curves and so forth, to put it simply there. And so essentially that's going to be much more calming to our nervous system for adults and for kids, not to mention just the different colors and things like that, and how that helps to regulate our brain, helps to regulate our nervous system. So being outside, being barefoot, getting in the grass, those are all super, super helpful things. Of course, running around, playing in the dirt, those are all going to be good things for overall health. And then, of course, playing in the dirt, being exposed to bacteria and things like that are naturally found outside is going to be great for building up your child's gut microbiome. And then I would say the last thing that I see being very, very common, a common factor for kids, very important, is limiting screen time. We've talked about this quite a bit, Dr. Tim, so we don't need to go over this too much here, but limiting screen time, because screen time, especially with all the blue light, is extremely stimulating to the brain. And I know that there's, kind of some habits that can form, whether the child gets home from school and goes right to the iPad or the TV, or maybe it's kind of like after dinner, right before bed, it's kind of iPad, TV type habits. And those things are going to wire your child. It's going to cause this sympathetic shift in your child's system. And I think it's something that really needs to be limited. Obviously, the least amount of screen time you can get a day is going to be better for your child. But I also understand that's a little bit difficult. So usually I'm encouraging parents like, hey, try to limit it to like 30 minutes to an hour a day. I feel like that's pretty reasonable. And then I also encourage parents to, whatever device they're using, to see if they can put on a red light filter on the, some kind of filter on the screen that's going to limit the blue light. So if it is a red light filter, then it's going to have a lot less energy. It's going to be way less stimulating to the brain, and it's going to be just a lot more, or a lot less sympathetic shifting, if that makes sense. So to the listener, I've shared 1 or 2 videos on social media regarding how to do that. I think Instagram is the main place, so you can kind of check a video out there as far as how you can do that on your devices, where you can make the screen red and limit a lot of that blue light. So Dr. Tim, let's jump into these immune system issues and overall health issues for kids, right? So under the immune system issues bracket here, ADD and ADHD is largely going to come from that, as well as gut issues, which we'll talk about. Allergies, ear infections, and tubes, which should not be normal. They happen all the time. It's common, but it shouldn't be normal. It's not normal. And then we have, things like strep throat, enlarged tonsils. Let's talk about those. And then let's also get into talking a little bit about eczema, skin issues in general, constipation, bedwetting, and then anything else that comes up. Again, to the listener, this is our clinical experience. This is what we see kids come in with often, and what we find that kind of helps with these different things. So, Dr. Tim, I'll just kind of let you kind of take it from there. Immune system issues, what are you often seeing the most of, and what do you generally see that that can really help, for the parent that's listening, that their kid has a lot of these different issues?
Yeah. So with kids, very often you'll see, especially with things like allergies or ear infections, where they need tubes and all that stuff, chronic sinus issues. That's very, very, very common.
Mm-hmm.
Where say you get sick with some sort of upper respiratory virus, some sort of cold, and your body's doing its best to fight it off, and it ends up making its way into your sinus. Well, once it gets in there, it's almost I think of it as very similar to like in your gut, where you get your kid eats a little bit of dirt or something that has some bacteria that makes its way into the digestive tract, throws off the microbiome, or they get a bacterial infection and take antibiotics, and then the microbiome gets out of whack, and then so you've got this imbalance of what's in there, and it just drives inflammation perpetually. Same type of thing can go on with the sinuses, except you can have it with bacteria, which that would be undoubtedly pretty painful and very obvious. But what's not as obvious is when there's that chronic chronic ear issues, chronic fluid in the ears, all that stuff from there being a virus that takes hold in the sinus. So whenever that happens, you can be susceptible to other co-infections, where say you get cold strain A, and then your body just has that it's chronically dealing with at a low grade, and then you're exposed to cold strain B, and then from there, that can kind of move in. And so a lot of times there's these layers of different viruses you kind of have to sift through with a few different um, antiviral herbs to clear things out completely. There's some really good ones that I've seen kick things pretty dang good sometimes, and that's like lomadium root. That one's awesome for sinus issues when there's chronic bubbling in the ears, fluid in the ears, all that stuff. Where it can, if that's the one thing you need, it really wipes stuff like that out. But that's not to say it does it every time. A lot of times I'll see somebody need something like olive leaf and astragalus, and then lomadium as the last step, or they'll just need some other things. So there's a lot of different things that you can utilize for helping clear that stuff up. But it's just a matter of cycling through different things if the first one doesn't work. Um, it's just all dependent on the strain of whatever you got going on. So I think
Yeah.
that's really important to address. Now, in regards to other things that I see in kids' immune systems, we've um, got things like metals. Metals are huge with kids, and we kind of talked about that in the last episode quite a bit with vaccines or even baby formula, diapers, all that stuff, where there's all kinds of metals in these things. And if you're introducing all these things to a young child's body right off the bat, and they don't have the tools and the immune tolerance to deal with things yet, they're going to have issues. And I truly believe that's why a lot of skin issues and autoimmunity and food sensitivities and all those things are becoming more and more prominent nowadays. Um, so with that, chelate metals out of there, try to eliminate them from the source earlier on in life. And then from there, I'll often see gut issues where kids get sick with an ear infection, they take an antibiotic, and then the parents don't do anything to remedy that, where the microbiome's probably not going to be happy. And so following that, there's just that chronic inflammation, skews the immune system, and leads to issues chronically. It can lead to skin issues. It could lead to digestive complaints, eventually things like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, all sorts of things there, or even just regular IBS, where stuff's just not quite right with the gut. And yeah, those are the big things I see. It's a great idea to get them calmed down early on, and there's plenty of things you can do, but those are the big ones, definitely the big ones. And if you really stay on top of those things, most of the other things that we're going to talk about in regards to like eczema or skin rashes, constipation, sympathetic dominance, all those things will kind of, I don't want to say melt away, but they might not even happen in the first place if you eliminate the things that could drive that to begin with. So
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned heavy metals, which is a huge issue with kids. And obviously, best case scenario, you're able to avoid the toxic sources of those, being what we talked about, the vaccines and the formulas and so forth. What kind of things do you generally see? Do you ever see consistent things being needed to help detox these metals in kids? I know that there's probably a couple of things I've seen pretty consistently, but didn't know if there was some consistency on your end.
yeah, a lot of times it's glutathione and its derivatives, all of the things that make it up, or the cofactors that help combine things and produce it. So like vitamin B6 in its activated form, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, I'll see that decently often. Even just straight up glutathione, glycine, those things are big. NAC or cysteine. But when it's not that, that's probably 20% or less of the time. I'll see selenium as being pretty significant. At least,
Mm-hmm.
I have to think with kids. I can't say for sure that selenium's huge. I know I see that a lot with adults,
Mm-hmm.
because selenium's great at chelating mercury, and
Right.
so with fillings and teeth, that would make a lot of sense there.
Right.
Now, what I do see quite a bit is like activated bioavailable vitamin C.
Yeah.
That's very, very common that I'll see with metals. So,
Yeah.
or alpha lipoic acid, that one shows up here and there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a handful of things that I see, but then it can be something as simple as like manganese, magnesium, iron, copper. It all depends on what metal's the issue.
Right.
Um, metals operate in balance. So if you've got a lot of mercury and your selenium's low, you need more selenium to help get rid of some of that mercury, where they like to be in that balance. So um, those are the few things. Vitamin C, not ascorbic acid. If you're going to get it from some sort of natural form. From typically supplementing it is great. Not just eating oranges; it's just not potent enough in there. But we specifically use like camu from Supreme Nutrition, from the camu fruit. Cataplex C from Standard Process is great. Or even if your kid does not do well with capsules, Supreme Nutrition has something called acerola or acerola, which it's another fruit, but they have it in a liquid form. That's not quite as potent as camu, but it's still 100 times more potent than citrus fruit.
Right.
And so if you want something that kind of tastes pretty decent and is in a liquid form, that's a good one that I typically recommend to people. So as far as it goes for the other minerals, I would just, get a good form of each of those things, just to help chelate stuff out of there if you think that's the issue.
Yeah.
And it's just make sure you get it from a reputable company. Use a lot of biotics research, pure encapsulations, thorn, all that stuff. And as long as it's not oxide, typically it's going to do pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Dr. Tim, we always recommend, just with anyone we talk to work with someone that's preferably certified in systems healthcare, the systems healthcare technique, because they'll be able to really get to the bottom of the issues and very specifically figure out what's going to be best for you to take and what's not needed or not helpful, or even what could be bad for you. And so working with a practitioner there can be really important. And again, for the listener, you can go to systemshealthcare.net and you can find practitioners there and see kind of who's closest to you across the states here. So, but yeah, being able to test for it is huge. I generally, with metals, I'll pretty commonly find things like selenium and zinc. Those are pretty common, but a lot of the ones that you mentioned as well, I'll also see. So those are really important. Now, I wanted to touch on a couple specific points with the immune system, specifically with things like ADD, ADHD. So if your child has this, maybe even you have this, to the listener here, there's a couple things that you need to know about this. Number one, this obviously is not normal. It's extremely common, but it's not normal. So your body can heal from this. You can balance the nervous system and function in a calm and very balanced manner. And so there's a way that you kind of go about working through this process to heal your body in this way. And the first thing is, number one, you've got to figure out kind of what the trigger might be or triggers. A lot of times with kids, I find that there's a food sensitivity, and that food sensitivity is essentially coming from some kind of gut issue. Maybe it's leaky gut. Maybe there's just some different infections there that are causing some imbalances. So you want to look at the gut health, you want to look at parasites and consider some of those things. But then with the immune system, it's dysregulated. And that's where a lot of these different imbalances and different issues come. And so obviously you've got to figure out if there is a food sensitivity, whether that is the dairy or the gluten. And generally with people that aren't able to test, but there's some ADD, ADHD going on, I'm usually recommending cut out all gluten, cut out all sugar, cut out all dairy. And you've got to do some different things that are going to help heal the gut and balance the immune system. What can you do to help balance the immune system? So generally the top few things, obviously there's a lot, right, Dr. Tim, that we test through with patients and figure out specifically what's needed. But a lot of consistent things I'll see is it's pretty common for kids to need vitamin D3, usually 4,000 to 6,000 IU per day, depending on kind of what's going on and how old they are. And then other really big ones I see for regulating the immune system is resveratrol and quercetin. Those can be huge. And so with ADD, ADHD, those have been some of the biggest nutrients I've seen that kind of help regulate and calm down the immune system from these different issues. There's other things, of course, like you mentioned, glutathione, of course, iron is important, vitamin A, things like that are also extremely important, and healthy fats, which we talk about quite a bit. Dr. Tim, I'm just going to roll through a couple of these, and then I want to open it up to see if you have any other comments or thoughts, and we can kind of keep moving together, if that sounds good. So then we've got allergies, right? So allergies, I would argue, is primarily going to be an issue with either, number one, either it starts in the gut, where we have this leaky gut issue, usually from parasites, or number two, it just starts from a dysregulated immune system, which kids don't come out of the womb with dysregulated immune systems unless there's been some kind of chemical or toxicity in the mom during pregnancy, a traumatic birth, or vaccines. And I think the most common thing I probably see is the vaccines that just totally dysregulate the immune system. And then kids start reacting to different things and stuff like that. It's not normal. It should not be happening. Allergies are not normal. Very common, but not normal. The ear infections, with this one, Dr. Tim, you spent a lot of really good time walking through the whole Th1, Th2 imbalance that happens when kids get vaccines. And essentially I'd recommend the listener go listen to our previous episode 16, but it's really important to understand that if you have this hypervigilant Th2 immune system response, your body is not going to be able to fight off viruses and bacteria and all these different things. And so it's pretty common that we'll see patients that have this imbalance. We have to correct that, and then we can support the immune system to kill these infections. So that's the ear infections. Strep throat, enlarged tonsils, these all come back to infections. A lot of times with tonsils, if you see some yellow pus, there's some bacterial involvement, but a lot of times chronic viruses will cause those enlarged tonsils. And that's kind of a wild issue, because I'll see adults that come in that have enlarged tonsils, and it's been years, and they always have some kind of subclinical like infection. Strep throat obviously is bacterial and so forth. So what are some things to the parents that you can use to support your child's immune system? So these are my favorites. And then Dr. Tim, I'd be curious to hear if you have any as well that you would add to kind of this list. So obviously vitamin D is pretty commonly needed. So vitamin D should be at the top of your list. If it's viral related, if there's a virus, elderberry is generally my top choice. Astragalus is probably my second. And then if it's bacterial, echinacea is probably my top choice. And then astragalus, there again, probably my second. And generally those will take care of most infections. Now, if it's a nasty strep throat, if it's like a nasty infection, then again, that one is going to be much more difficult to try to address without the muscle testing to figure out exactly what's needed. But if you do have the testing, you can figure out exactly what's needed. Man, I've seen strep throat turn around in like 2 days, like 100%. So it's pretty cool what the immune system can do. So, all right. So Dr. Tim, I'm going to slide it back to you here. Anything else that you want to touch on with some of those points there? And then any other just general immune system support that you would say, hey, parents, this would be great for your kid to have. Keep this on the shelf.
You touched on everything pretty good. I already talked about allergies and ear infections and all that stuff a little bit. In regards to strep throat specifically, one other one I want to mention that it's not, I actually didn't hear about it through any of our training, is grapefruit seed extract. Not grapeseed extract, but grapefruit seed extract.
Okay.
That's one that I've heard it just kicks strep throat in the butt. Tastes
Wow.
like crap, apparently.
Is it a liquid or what is this?
It is a liquid. It is a
Okay.
liquid. I'll have to, if anybody that's listening is curious as to what company to get that from, I'll have to do some research. So feel free to reach out from us or reach out to either of us. I know what it looks like. I just can't think of the brand right now. But that I've seen that wipe stuff out completely with people without even really needing to worry about the testing all that much.
Mm-hmm.
So just food for thought on that one. In regards to just general viral versus bacterial, viral stuff, can't go wrong with elderberry, can't go wrong with astragalus or golden seal. When there's the chronic sinus issues, that's where the low medium comes in. The low medium is a very, very, very potent Th1 stimulator. And so if you're in this Th2 dominant state and you really need some Th1s to kick something that's just hanging out in there, that's a really, really good one for that. So with that, if you were to do anything like that, it is a pretty low dose. If you get any sort of like tincture with that in it, it's like 15 drops, not even a full dropper full, which is the equivalent of like 60 drops. Probably 15 drops 3 times a day is what I normally recommend people. And then if it's for a kid, think of the adult dose as being like 18 units for 18 years. Once you hit 18, that's the full adult dose. So if say your kid's 3 years old, you're going to do 3/18 of the adult dose. I know it's a weird unit, but that's what it works out to be.
Okay, that's helpful.
There's a fancy formula that a company that I utilize has in their little booklet with their catalog and everything. But that's what the math ends up being, is whatever 18ths of the adult dose is what you should do for kids. So anyway, that's that for the viral ones. Bacterial, I mean, astragalus is great for bacterial. So is golden seal as well. Things like neem or Malia is great. All kinds of berberines are great. All kinds of stuff. So it's really difficult to say,
The
hey,
list is huge. Yeah.
do these ones specifically, because it can be a lot of different things. So
Yeah.
but yeah, that pretty much covers it. I think it's good to get on to whatever we got next. So
So eczema and skin rashes, right? So I mean, I see a lot of these different sensitivities, food sensitivities, and leaky gut type issues kind of involved with this. Do you see kind of similar things there, Dr. Tim, or anything else that you'll generally see with like eczema and skin rashes?
at least where I'm at now, food sensitivities haven't been a big thing. Not to say that you're wrong, but it's a lot of times it's a regional thing, where specifically where I'm at, I see a lot of metals. I see a lot of gut issues for that stuff.
Yeah.
Often both. And as you work through both, tends to do pretty dang good. So with dry skin specifically, it's not every single time, but these eczema and rashes typically go with dry, cracky skin.
Right.
And very often there'll be a gallbladder component to that, where fat digestion is super important. One of the biggest things that's going to inhibit proper fat digestion is inhibition of bile production, which is very often due to blood sugar dysregulation, whether it be the stress side of things, the low end of blood sugar, or the high end with insulin. So very important, I think, to think about that, where if you're chronically stressed and you develop some sort of skin issue, not only is it that your immune system is probably out of whack, but it's also probably that you're not producing sufficient bile. Constipation is very common with that, as a good indicator for proper or improper bile production and secretion, fat digestion, all that stuff. But then with that, with the skin stuff specifically, vitamin A is huge. But that goes right with the fat digestion, because it is a fat soluble vitamin. So if you're not digesting fat properly, you're not going to absorb vitamin A properly. So
yeah, that's huge. And I was waiting for you to mention that, the vitamin A specifically, which is super, super important when it comes to the itchiness and the gallbladder stuff, all that stuff. Dr. Tim, you just kind of covered it here. So constipation, right, is usually going to be an issue with bile flow, gallbladder health. And you just touched on that. The other thing that I would mention too with constipation is overall sympathetic dominance, right? If kids are stuck in this kind of fight or flight, like stress state, if they're overstimulated, all of those things can impact their body, in which case we got to go back to the first majority of this episode where we talk about sympathetic stuff, things that can impact that, our nutrition, screen time, vaccines, chemicals, all these different things can impact that. Dr. Tim, I wanted to mention a couple other things for the listener that can be helpful with constipation and overall like skin dryness, but mostly like constipation issues. So camu that you mentioned a little bit earlier can be really, really helpful there. I'll also find choline can be good. Choline you can get in a supplement from Standard Process. It's also found in the yolk of eggs. So that can be really helpful. And then another thing that I'll commonly find is like beets, because it has trimethylglycine, TMG. So you can get that in a supplement also. It's called Beta Food from Standard Process. But obviously you can get beets in general at the store. So those are probably some things that I would say can really help with constipation. Magnesium can be good, of course. Generally, my top recommendations there is probably magnesium citrate. Maybe magnesium glycinate would be next. And then I do like magnesium calm, which is kind of the name of the brand name. Magnesium carbonate is kind of what you'll see on the nutrition label there. So those are some of my kind of top recommendations there if there's an issue with constipation. But a lot of times there's infections too in the gut that can contribute to constipation. Those definitely need to be addressed. So food sensitivities, constipation, heavy metals, all the things that we've talked about.
One more thing that I'd like to add to that with gallbladder health is I have this idea, this theory that a lot of times, especially with young women in general, or even kids, where if fat isn't a big emphasis in the diet, you need fat, you need cholesterol to make bile. You need it. Cholesterol is the backbone of bile salts, so it's a huge component of bile. And if you're not getting sufficient cholesterol and fats and honestly good butter and things like that, you're not going to get the proper cholesterol to make bile. And so if you're stressed, if your immune system's out of whack, and you're not getting that good fat, it's going to be the perfect storm for gallbladder issues. And so very often I'll see that the last step, the last push for somebody's gallbladder, before I'll stop see it testing at all, is just eat butter. And so you need that cholesterol component, you need fat, but you need fat to digest fat at that point. So then you need to eat fat to be able to produce the things to get you back to where you need to be to digest fat. So
For
it's
sure.
kind of tricky there. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that where butter is very, very good for you for that aspect.
Yep.
It
No, that's
won't just,
good.
it won't make you fat.
Yeah, no, there's so many benefits to grass-fed butter. We've talked about that quite a bit, and I think hopefully our listener has come across that already. With vitamin A, I wanted to mention there's different sources of vitamin A. The one that you want to look for is palmitate. So if you look at the nutrition label, the ingredients and so forth, you want it to say vitamin A and then in parentheses palmitate. That's primarily the one that I see test most for people. There's also vitamin A found in cod liver oil. I don't really see that test for a lot of people. I think it can be helpful from time to time, but not really, not that often. So wanted to mention that. Enuresis is bedwetting. If your child has issue with bedwetting, the most common thing I see is high histamines due to food sensitivities, usually gluten, dairy, or corn. So you want to take a break from those, cut those out. And then you might consider supporting their body with natural antihistamines like camu berry, maybe quercetin, maybe vitamin A, things like that. That's generally what I'll see works really, really well for bedwetting issues. What about you, Dr. Tim? Anything else on the bedwetting topic there?
No, I think it's pretty good. Other than the sympathetic dominance stuff,
Right.
where there's increased urination due to decreased aldosterone production.
Right.
Kids aren't the best at holding their bladder anyway. So when you don't provide them with the hormones to do so, um, it's gonna lead to issues. So definitely the food sensitivity stuff. But on the flip side, just solely with the stress component, we've talked about this before. The cortisol shunt, where cholesterol will make progesterone, and then progesterone can either go down to aldosterone or over into your androgens or down into cortisol. When things prioritize cortisol from sympathetic dominance and your fight or flight state, your body's not concerned with urinary retention and sodium and potassium retention through the urine, which is what aldosterone does. Is your kidneys will indiscriminately filter out all these things, and then there's that nice snaking hose that goes through the kidney, then eventually to the ureter to go to the bladder. Along that big long hose, that's where aldosterone will tell the kidneys, hey, let's pull some stuff back in because we don't need to get rid of all this stuff. And the degree of how much of that hormone is secreted will dictate how much sodium, potassium, water, all those things are reabsorbed throughout the kidney. So anyway, that's a big component as well. And yeah, that kind of brings us into the next step, which is just sympathetic dominance. So
Yeah.
we've talked about this quite a bit. It's just your fight or flight state. So what causes you to be stuck in fight or flight? Blood sugar dysregulation is huge. Low blood sugar leading to stress hormone production to prop things back up. Or chronic inflammation is huge, where
Yep.
you have your Th2 dominance with decreased Th1s. The one thing that's going to suppress your Th1s is stress due to emotional stress, blood sugar, chemical stress, physical stress. If you're overtraining, or if say your kid's even like a gymnast or something, where there's just super high physical demand for a sport or something. Other than that, I would doubt that there's a lot of kids running marathons or doing anything extreme in that regard. But all those things are going to drive Th1s down. And then all of the sinus issues or gut issues, metals, mold, histamines, food sensitivities, all those things are going to drive Th2s high. So if you have all of these issues allergies, gut issues, all that stuff, you are inherently going to drive more stress. And so, although the immune system isn't necessarily, you don't think of the immune system as being, the nervous system, but it's so integrated with one another because if the immune system is skewed a certain way, inflammation from that will inherently drive more stress. Stress leads to sympathetic dominance. So, balance the immune system, balance the stress, and a lot of health things will get better.
100%, 100%. Dr. Tim, this has been great. I think we've covered just about everything that we aimed to cover here in talking about this one. We might have some more coming up in the future, some more episodes on some pediatric related stuff, but I think we've covered quite a bit through this one in our last episode, which is super exciting. Dr. Tim, let's kind of wrap up. How can people find you and get in contact with you?
My name is Dr. Tim Augustyniak. I practice in Bentonville, Arkansas. You can find me online at draugustiniak.com. Through there, all my socials are linked. There's links to the podcast, link to Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all the stuff. All my contact info, if you click to the front page of the website and scroll all the way down, all my contact info is there. So it's got my office number, email, you name it, all those things. So any input as to what sorts of things we should cover in the future, feel free to reach out, shoot me an email, text, call, whatever you got to do. Thanks everybody for listening.
Yep, absolutely. And again, I'm Dr. Joel Miller, located here just outside Dallas, Texas, here in Freedom Health and Wellness Practice here. You can find me on my website at drjoelmiller.com. You can look me up on the different socials and should be able to find me pretty easy. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope this has been a blessing to you. We got some more good stuff coming here in the future that we're super excited for, and we're looking forward to it. Hope you guys are having a great day and a great week. And definitely reach out if you need any help or have any questions. We'd be happy to help. With all that said, peace.